World War I was a complex web of decisions, risks, ambitions, and strategies. We know quite a lot about how it started, the reasons, how it was fought, and how it ended. We even know the frontman of this great conflict, the political leaders who made the final decisions that drew their countries into war. But have you ever wondered who truly inspired those decisions? Because, let's be honest, most of those leaders didn't fully understand the potential consequences of what they were starting. They didn't always grasp their nation's true military capabilities. Instead, they relied on advisors, generals, chiefs of staff, and military strategists, the people who really knew the situation on the ground and could foresee what a global war might bring. These were real individuals, with real names, backgrounds, and personal ambitions. Yet history often leaves them in the shadows because they weren't the ones who formally declared war. In this episode, we're going to bring those hidden figures into the light, to discover who they were, what they believed, and how their advice helped shape one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. My name is Paul. This is the Past Perfect channel. We explore the moments in history that were far from perfect, yet they made our past and shaped our present. Let's dive in. Under its policy of Weltpolitik, Germany's military and political leaders increasingly considered preventive war a strategic option. This consideration was expressed in the pursuit of a place in the sun, which many within the German leadership believed could not be achieved through peaceful means alone. The first explicit discussion of such a war occurred during the War Council of December 1912, when Kaiser Wilhelm II met with senior generals to assess Europe's tense political and military situation. The main concerns discussed were Russia's ongoing military expansion, expected to significantly strengthen its army by 1916-1917, and the possibility of British intervention in a continental conflict. At the Council, two main positions emerged. The first was that of General Helmuth von Moltke, the chief of the General Staff. Moltke argued strongly for a preventive war, emphasizing that the sooner the better. He feared that delaying action would reduce Germany's chances of victory once Russia completed its rearmament. The second position was that of Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, who was responsible for naval policy and urged caution. He argued that the fleet was not yet fully ready for a large-scale war and recommended postponing any major military action until Germany was better prepared. Although the Council didn't produce a formal decision, it laid the groundwork for German strategic thinking, shaping how the country would respond to future crises. The Schlieffen Plan, formulated by Alfred von Schlieffen, later modified by Moltke, emphasized a swift offensive against France, followed by a shift of forces to the Eastern Front. Schlieffen had recognized that Germany, geographically situated between France and Russia, needed a decisive first strike to avoid a prolonged two-front war. Moltke retained this approach, adjusting the plan as necessary and overseeing its execution. Moltke and the German military high command exerted considerable influence over Wilhelm II. In July 1914, following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Moltke viewed the timing as strategically advantageous. Russia was not yet fully mobilized, and the French army was still reorganizing. On July 30th to 31st, Moltke exchanged telegrams with his Austrian counterpart Konrad von Hötzendorf, urging Austria-Hungary to mobilize against Russia and confirming Germany's unconditional support. When Wilhelm II briefly considered altering their plan, suggesting a focus on Russia while bypassing France, Moltke resisted, warning that changing mobilization plans at the last moment could lead to chaos and undermine Germany's ability to wage war effectively. Similarly, Georg von Waldesee, a senior staff officer, argued that Germany should pursue military solutions decisively as the circumstances were favorable. Erich von Falkenhayn, the Prussian Minister of War, played a critical role once the July crisis escalated. While initial hopes held that the conflict might remain localized between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, Falkenhayn assured the Kaiser that the German army was ready to support Austria-Hungary if the war expanded. Notably, Admiral Tirpitz, although not a strong advocate of an immediate offensive, contributed to a climate of conflict readiness through his long-term naval planning against Britain, particularly the expansion of the fleet.
By the outbreak of World War I, the decisions, plans and pressures from Germany's military leadership, from Schlieffen's plan to Moltke's insistence on preventive war, had created a situation where war in 1914 was both feasible and, in their view, strategically necessary. Russia's ongoing rearmament and the perceived constraints of geography made timing critical, and the German High Command was prepared to act decisively when the opportunity arose.
Austria-Hungary's most prominent calls for war emerged during the July crisis. One of leading figures taking a hawkish stance was the foreign minister Count Leopold von Berthold. Berthold played a decisive role in shaping Vienna's response to the Sarajevo assassination. Convinced that Serbia was behind the attack, he declared at the end of June that a firm and resolute response was necessary. Seeking to ensure Austria-Hungary would not act alone, Berthold dispatched Count Alexander Hoyos, a special envoy, to Berlin in early July to obtain German backing, the assurance later known as the blank check. Another important figure, Karl von Storck, the Austrian minister-president from 1911 to 1915, demanded immediate action against Serbia following the assassination. During a council on July 7th, he supported a decisive solution to the Serbian problem, arguing that the monarchy must act firmly to safeguard its Bosnian provinces. Governor-General Oskar Potiorek, responsible for Bosnia-Herzegovina, was another strong advocate for military action. Having repeatedly urged mobilization in earlier crises, he now pressed Viennese leaders to act swiftly against Belgrade to restore imperial authority in the Balkans. However, the most active advocate for war was General Franz Conrad von Hötzendorf, chief of the General Staff. Perhaps the most bellicose officer in the Habsburg army, Conrad had for years advocated preventive war against Serbia. In July 1914, he declared that the moment for a final reckoning had come and pressed for immediate military measures against Belgrade. His mobilization plans envisioned concentrating forces against Serbia while simultaneously preparing for a potential conflict with Russia.
In response to Austria-Hungary's aggressive stance, Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Sazonov, emerged as one of the most outspoken defenders of Serbian sovereignty. From the very start, Sazonov resolutely resisted Austria's diplomatic moves. When he received news of the harsh Austrian ultimatum to Serbia on July 23rd, he reportedly exclaimed, "C'est la guerre européenne." This is European war.
Sazonov viewed the ultimatum's demands as an intolerable violation of Serbia's independence. He persuaded the government to increase its military readiness. As the crisis deepened, he urged Tsar Nicholas II to authorize wider mobilization. Russia began preliminary steps by recalling officers on July 25th and initiating preparatory measures for partial mobilization on July 26th. Fearing that hesitation would allow Germany to launch a preventive attack, Sazonov pressed relentlessly for full mobilization. On July 30th, after a day of intense debate, he finally won the Tsar's consent. Apart from Sazonov, other military commanders and officials also favored war. General Nikolai Yanushkevich, Chief of the General Staff, and War Minister Vladimir Sukhamlinov were key figures pushing for it. Both argued that partial mobilization was technically impossible and strategically dangerous. On July 28th, Yanushkevich and his senior officers agreed that the period preparatory to war should be replaced immediately by formal mobilization orders.
Although not directly involved in the initial July crisis, Russia's ally, France, was actively planning for future military action. By 1911, General Joseph Joffre had become France's Chief of the General Staff. He insisted that if war came, France must immediately strike into Alsace-Lorraine. For this purpose, the so-called Plan 17 was developed, ready to be implemented once war began.
When the July crisis erupted, Joffre moved quickly to ensure France was prepared. On July 28th, he assured the Russian General Staff that France was ready to fulfill its allied obligations. By the end of July, tensions in Paris were high and the government was hesitant. Joffre repeatedly warned ministers that if France failed to act, the Germans will enter France without firing a shot. On July 31st, when political indecision threatened to delay mobilization, Joffre seized the draft order for general mobilization to ensure it would be issued without further delay. The next day, August 1st, 1914, France proclaimed general mobilization, a step that fell short of declaring war but made conflict almost inevitable. Another important military figure was the War Minister Adolphe-Marie Messémy. He worked closely with Joffre during the July crisis, though the two sometimes acted independently. On July 25th, Messémy ordered all senior officers on leave to return to their posts, one of the first visible signs of French readiness. The next day, France recalled troops from leave, and on July 27th, the government ordered the return of garrisons from North Africa. Messémy and Joffre both pressed Russia to complete its mobilization as rapidly as possible, understanding that the Franco-Russian alliance depended on mutual timing and coordinated military action. In these final days of peace, both men embodied France's determination to stand by its ally and prepare for a war that now seemed unavoidable.
Initially, it was unclear whether Great Britain would join the war. Nevertheless, as the July crisis worsened, the number of military officials and politicians favoring intervention steadily increased.
A primary figure was Sir Edward Grey, the British Foreign Secretary. At the height of the crisis, Grey believed that if war broke out between France and Germany, Britain could not stand aside. For him, the balance of power in Europe and the security of Britain itself depended on preventing a German victory. Yet, despite his convictions, Grey refused to give France any formal guarantee of support. Until the very beginning of the war, this ambiguity left both parties and adversaries uncertain. The Germans, assuming Britain would remain neutral, pressed ahead with their plans. Still, Grey sought to avoid catastrophe. On July 26th, he proposed a four-power conference involving Britain, France, Germany and Italy to mediate between Austria and Serbia. The effort came too late. As events accelerated, Gray came to believe that German militarism, not diplomacy, was driving Europe toward disaster. He later wrote that Germany's aim was nothing less than the hegemony of Europe. When German troops crossed into Belgium on August 4, 1914, violating a treaty Britain had sworn to uphold, Gray concluded that neutrality was no longer possible. That evening, as war was declared, he famously remarked, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." Although only a lieutenant general, Sir Henry Wilson wielded immense behind-the-scenes influence. As director of military operations, he was convinced that war with Germany was inevitable. Wilson was one of Britain's strongest advocates for close military coordination with France and helped plan the deployment of the British Expeditionary Force alongside the French army. His pro-French, anti-German stance made him one of the most outspoken hawks in the British High Command. Among the cabinet, Winston Churchill was another decisive and hawkish voice. On July 26th, with Europe teetering on the edge of war, he ordered the Royal Navy, then the most powerful in the world, to remain concentrated and ready for immediate action. That single order, cancelling the dispersal of the fleet after naval exercises, ensured that Britain's navy was fully mobilized before hostilities began. It was a crucial precaution later described as a great service to France. At first, David Lloyd George stood firmly with the peace faction in the Liberal cabinet. A lifelong opponent of militarism, he regarded war with deep reluctance. But when Germany invaded Belgium, violating its neutrality and threatening northern France, his position shifted. For Lloyd George, the invasion transformed the conflict from a continental power struggle into a moral issue. Britain, he argued, could not stand by while an independent nation was overrun. By early August, he too accepted the necessity of war.